40% of Scotland is nearly empty, with giant mountains, endless rain, and glens that have seen their people vanish. Northern Scotland holds vast land, but barely 3% of the nation's population lives here. And some places are emptier than when Bonnie Prince Charlie fled in 1746. To understand why so few remain and what forced so many out, we have to start with the land itself. Granite mountains rise sharply from the land, their slopes covered in thin, acidic soils that resist the plow. In northern Scotland, just 9% of the ground can be cultivated at all. The rest is rocky, boggy, or so steep that even sheep struggle for footing. Where the soil is deepest, it is often waterlogged or laced with peat, making drainage and planting a constant battle. Rain falls on more than 200 days each year, soaking fields and turning tracks into streams. In the West Highlands and the Islands, annual rainfall can top 4,000 millimeters, 5 times what Edinburgh sees. Even in summer, temperatures rarely climb above 10 degrees Celsius. The growing season is short, sometimes only 4 or 5 months. Farmers in the South might sow and reap across 7 or 8 months, but here a late frost or an early storm can wipe out an entire year's work. The wind brings its own challenges, lashing the coastlines and sweeping through the glens with enough force to flatten crops and scatter livestock. In winter, snow cuts off villages for days at a time, leaving residents to rely on whatever stores they have managed to keep dry. These conditions have shaped the land for centuries. Most settlements cluster in pockets where the soil is just good enough for a small field of barley or potatoes. Beyond these rare patches, the landscape is walled, beautiful, and stubbornly inhospitable to large-scale farming. The geography here does not just set the backdrop for life in the north, it limits what is possible and who can stay. In northern Scotland, remoteness is not just about distance, it's about obstacles that stack up, one after another. For many villages, the nearest hospital or grocery store is 30 to 50 miles away, often at the end of a winding, single-track road. Until the 20th century, some places had no road access at all. Even now, most rural routes are narrow, and winter storms can make them impassable for days. When gale-force winds sweep in from the Atlantic, ferries to the islands are cancelled, sometimes for a week at a time. On the mainland, snowdrifts or fallen trees can leave entire communities stranded, waiting for rescue teams or supply drops. In 2018, heavy snow and high winds closed more than 20% of Highland roads, isolating towns and scattering power lines across the hillsides. For islanders, the ferry is a lifeline, but winter seas cancel 1 in 5 crossings and flights are just as vulnerable to the weather. Mobile phone coverage is patchy and broadband speeds lag far behind the rest of the UK, making it hard to work or study from home. In places like Knoydart, the journey to the nearest doctor means a 40-mile trip, sometimes by boat, sometimes on foot. These logistical barriers don't just make life inconvenient, they shape every decision, from where people settle to whether they can stay at all. The landscape's beauty comes with a price. Isolation that is both physical and practical, woven into daily life and impossible to ignore. Eviction notices arrived without warning. In glens and straths across the Highlands, families were ordered from their homes, sometimes with only a few days to gather what they could carry. Estate factors and hired hands swept through entire villages, driving people out in groups of dozens or even hundreds. In Sutherland alone, more than 2,000 were cleared from their land in a single year. Over the course of a century, as many as 100,000 to 200,000 people were forced to leave the Highlands and Islands. The numbers are staggering, but the methods left even deeper scars. To prevent any chance of return, eviction crews set fire to the thatched roofs and timber beams. Smoke rose from the hillsides as entire settlements vanished in a matter of hours. Testimonies from the time described children shivering in the snow while their homes burned behind them, mothers clutching whatever possessions they could salvage. The old crofting life ended not with a slow decline, but with the sudden violence of fire and forced exile. The empty glens that remain are a direct result of these clearances, their silence broken only by the wind and the memory of those driven away. Landlords saw a new opportunity in sheep. By the turn of the 19th century, wool prices soared, and a single acre grazed by sheep could bring in between £2 and £5 a year, 4 or 5 times what tenant farmers paid for the same land. Driven by mounting debts after the failed Jacobite uprisings and the lure of quick profit, estate owners across the Highlands made a calculated decision. They cleared entire communities from the interior glens, leasing vast tracts to sheep farmers instead. The law offered little protection. Before 1886, tenants had no right to their land, no matter how many generations had farmed it. Eviction was swift and absolute, enforced by estate factors and, if needed, the sheriff's men. The aftermath left a permanent void. Gaelic-speaking families scattered to the coast where they crowded into makeshift crofts or boarded ships bound for Canada, Australia, and the United States. Between 1800 and 1860, tens of thousands left the Highlands for good. The glens fell silent, stripped not only of people but of culture. Gaelic, once the language of daily life, faded to near extinction. The empty hills and ruined villages that remain are more than a relic. They are the living legacy of a system that valued sheep and wool above families and tradition. In the decades after the clearances, communities that once depended on the land turned to the sea and shore for survival. Kelp harvesting became the backbone of island economies, employing as many as 20,000 people by the early 1800s. At its peak, the kelp trade brought in more than £200,000 a year, with entire families working the shorelines from May to September. But the end of the Napoleonic Wars in 1815 triggered a sudden collapse. European markets reopened. Prices for kelp plummeted by 80%, and by 1821 the industry that had propped up the West Coast was in ruins. Shipping records from the time show hundreds of vessels left idle, and bankruptcy notices from North Uist to Lewis list hundreds of families driven into poverty almost overnight. Fishing, too, once offered hope. The herring fleets of Stornoway and Wick filled the harbors with more than 1,000 boats each season. For decades, these catches fed not just Scotland, but markets across Europe. Yet by the 1960s, overfishing and new international quotas slashed the catch by 90%. The last big herring boats left Stornoway in the late 1970s, leaving empty piers and silent curing yards. Textile weaving, once a cottage industry in every glen, suffered a quieter decline. By 1900, hand looms had been replaced by machines in the cities. The skills that once supported thousands dwindled to a handful of family workshops. Each lost trade narrowed the options for those who remained, stripping away the economic base that had once allowed these scattered communities to survive. Tourism now brings a brief surge of life to northern villages, but it lasts only 3 or 4 months each year. From May to August, hotels fill and shops open their doors, but by autumn, the main street is often quiet again. The work that remains is mostly seasonal, with wages trailing 20 to 30% below the Scottish average. For many families, this means patching together part-time jobs and relying on savings to get through the winter. In towns like Ullapool or Stornoway, the average age has crept into the mid-40s, several years older than the national figure. Young people, after finishing school, rarely return. Some leave for university in Glasgow or Edinburgh, others for apprenticeships or jobs in the south, and most do not come back. A family in the Outer Hebrides might watch their children grow up, graduate, and move away, leaving parents and grandparents behind. School rolls shrink year after year, and more than 20 primary schools have closed since 2000. In some communities, the loss of a school is a turning point. Families with young children leave, and the cycle accelerates. What remains is a patchwork of aging communities, scattered across a vast landscape where the echoes of past industries and lost generations are never far from daily life. Today, vast stretches of northern Scotland remain nearly silent. There are fewer children, fewer jobs, and a population that is still aging. As rural schools close and communities shrink, the question is not just who leaves, but who stays to shape what comes next. The land endures. Its future depends on who returns.